Deep in the frozen wilderness, where humans dared not tread, an old wolf stumbled upon a young foal stuck in a deep mud pit. But he didn't walk away. He stepped down and saved the very creature that was supposed to be his enemy. But what shook the world wasn't the rescue. It was how the wild Mustang herd responded after. Not even lifelong wilderness men could have predicted what would come next. Snow was beginning to melt across the Wallowa Mountains. It was the time old-timers in eastern Oregon called the forests in between breath, when winter refused to leave and spring had only just begun to toe the threshold. Dark patches of mud emerged along the creek beds that had been frozen solid for 3 months. The air was clammy with the scent of old pine and rotting soil, and the fog clung to every tree trunk like a breath that didn't want to let go. Deep in the woods, a gray figure was moving slowly along a wet slope. That was Ash. No one had named him. People only called him that after glimpsing the silver streaks around his neck and shoulders. A lone old wolf, once the leader of the Snake River Valley Pack. But that was before the famine year took his kin. Now he wandered alone. No purpose, no territory, no desire for dominance. Only the remaining scraps of instinct kept his legs moving through long nights, hunger, snowfall, and dreams filled with howls no one answered. That day, Ash had been tracking a mountain hare. The scent was faint in the wind, but enough to make him lower his head, slow his gait, and wait. But then something made him stop. Not the smell of blood, not the alarm of prey. It was a sound. A strange one, like stone dropping into water. Soft, short, then silence, then again. A sound unlike any creature he had ever hunted. A sound without fear, only urgency. Ash tilted his ears and stepped toward the sound. It came from a small landslide on the hillside. A recent rain, the first in weeks, had caused the earth to slip, leaving behind a muddy pit nearly 10 feet deep, scattered with rotting logs and loose rocks. At the center of the pit, a tiny creature flailed, mud up to its shoulders, legs kicking helplessly at the air. A foal. Ash stopped. He didn't move forward, didn't retreat, just stood still quiet as the trees. The wind still carried the scent of sweat and thick, soupy mud. The foal kicked again but failed. Its legs slid down, sinking deeper. Its head tilted back toward the edge, eyes wide, clear, wet, and without resentment. No pleading, only a silent hope not to be left alone. Ash took a step back. He had no reason to stay, no kin, no obligation, no blood ties. And in the wild, wolves and horses were never on the same side. Wolves saw horses as distant shadows across snowy plains. Horses sensed wolves as signals to flee. But here, in this thick muck, there were no laws, no fear, only a fragile life, moments from being swallowed in silence. Ash took a deep breath. He stepped forward. He began circling the pit's edge, each paw placed with care. The mud was slick and thick. In places, it sank nearly to his chest. But then he found an angled patch where the slope hadn't fully collapsed, just enough for him to lower his body inch by inch. Each step tore through a memory of when he'd once fallen into a snow-cracked ravine, and his own kind had turned away. The foal watched, didn't cry, didn't groan. Ash drew closer, the scent of mud and baby fur mixed. He lowered his head and gently clamped his jaws around the foal's neck. He didn't bite, didn't squeeze, just held. And then, like dragging a mountain, he pulled back, using every ounce of strength to yank the foal upward. The mud fought back. With each pull, the tiny body slipped back half a stride. At one point, Ash feared he would be dragged down too. But then, with a sudden lurch and final heave, the foal's front legs caught the edge. Ash braced, shoving with his chest. Both collapsed onto the soaked grass above. The ground squelched beneath their weight, too soft to hold anything more. Ash panted, mud smeared from nose to belly in gray streaks. The foal lay just a few feet away, trembling uncontrollably. No words, no sounds, only breath. The wind shifted, the scent of life passed gently through the canopy. Ash didn't know why he hadn't left, didn't understand what held him there beneath the foal's gaze. He only knew that for the first time in many winters he wasn't alone, not entirely. The foal who would never know his name, though people would one day call him Clover, closed his eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from trust. Ash lay beside him, rested his head against a rotted tree root. In his eyes shimmered the last haze of afternoon light, as if the old forest had just composed a wordless song, starting with a breath, and ending in the silence of two souls, uninvited but found. Clover wasn't asleep. Though his eyes were half closed, and every now and then a tremor rippled through his tiny frame, sleep never came. His little body still caked in thick mud along his back, flanks, and mane shivered in waves, with each gust of wind that swept across the low clearing. The chill of the earth seeped into his thin, underdeveloped coat, and his young muscles had no defense against the lingering bite of spring cold after a long winter. Ash stood nearby. He no longer lay down like before. After that brief rest, the crusted mud on his back had begun to crack, flaking off in brittle patches with each movement. The old wolf paced around Clover in slow, silent circles like drifting fog. His eyes never left the trembling foal. This wasn't the first time Ash had witnessed a young creature caught between life and death, but it was the first time he had been the reason that life still clung to breath. The wind began to shift. The treetops rustled faintly overhead. Ash drew in a shallow breath. There was something new in the air, not the stench of carrion, not the scent of fox or deer or man. This scent was wider, fuller, alive. Something was coming. A sound echoed faintly through the northern trees, the rhythm of hooves, slow, heavy, deliberate. Then more of them, spread out, cautious. Ash froze. A wild herd of mustangs was approaching. The foal seemed to sense it too. He turned his head toward the sound, his ears twitching. Then he let out a soft, whinny short, thin, not loud, but just enough for the creatures approaching to stop dead in the old-growth forest. From the thinning tree line, a single horse emerged first. Her mane was smoky gray, fluttering gently in the breeze. Her body was strong and statuesque, as if carved from stone. Her eyes showed no panic, no excessive caution, just a gaze. Long, deep, measured, Sable, Clover's mother. She didn't neigh, didn't gallop. She simply stepped forward, hooves sinking into damp leaves and soft earth. Ash didn't move, but his shoulders tensed, his head lowered slightly, not in submission, but with caution. A wolf had never stood this close to a Mustang herd, much less stood between a mother and her child and lived to tell it. Behind Sable, two more horses emerged, an older stallion with a dark, sinewy mane and a mare with a muddied belly, heavy with foal. They didn't speak, didn't approach, just stood behind their leader, waiting. Clover gasped for breath and let out another whinny louder this time. His front legs lifted, shaky, then fell, then lifted again. He wanted to stand, to walk, to run toward the only thing in the world that still felt familiar. Sable responded. She dipped her head and quickened her pace. A deep, throaty sound rumbled from her chest as she broke into a trot toward her child. Ash stepped aside. He didn't snarl, didn't vanish into the underbrush. He simply pivoted, clearing the path, his gaze locked on Sable. When she reached Clover, Sable halted just a breath away. She lowered her head and touched her muzzle to the foal's face, inhaling deeply. Then came a string of soft, low vibrations, a mother's comfort. She licked Clover's forehead once, twice, again, washing away not just the mud, but the fear that had clung to her child since he'd fallen into that pit. Clover stretched, trying to rise again. This time he stood, wobbly but upright, at his mother's side. Ash stepped back slowly. A silent gesture. His shoulders eased, his eyes lowered. Sable looked at him. For the first time, their gazes met. Predator and prey. The hunter and the hunted. But there was no threat, no resentment, not even gratitude, just an acknowledgement. That in this moment something had occurred between them that surpassed instinct. Then Sable nodded. A small motion, but one heavy with meaning, like a promise carried by the forest. Ash didn't answer. He just stood still as the others approached, surrounding the reunited pair, and then, gradually, began to turn away. Clover glanced back, his body still weak, but his eyes held a new kind of light, no longer pleading, but recognition. Ash had stayed. Ash watched them go. As the Mustang herd disappeared into the dense trees and the sound of hooves faded into the dry leaves, Ash finally lifted his head. A breath escaped him, silent, unseen. No one heard it, but if they had, they might not have found words for what it meant. Evening fell, clouds thickened, veiling the last amber rays. Fog began to settle again, but this time it wasn't cold. Ash laid down beneath a tree. He no longer looked toward the herd's trail. He curled his body, resting his head on his front paws, eyes half closed. Not hungry, not cold, not afraid. Only at peace. And in that peace, the wordless song between two creatures of different worlds, without a shared language, without a shared path, still lingered somewhere among the leaves. Morning broke. The first rays of sunlight spilled through a narrow canyon, casting golden light across the dried patches of mud left behind in the forest grass. Ash had left the low clearing before dawn. He hadn't looked back at the strange place where the night before a lone old wolf had pulled a foal from a pit of sludge-like, dragging a memory from the mire of his own past. And yet there was something different in Ash's stride that morning. Not hurried, not aimless, but intentional, as if he suddenly knew where he was going. Halfway up a wooded slope, where a narrow stream split at the root of an old pine, Ash paused. His eyes squinted slightly, ears tilted back. There was smoke in the wind, not thick, not choking, but unmistakable, the scent of slow-burning wood. The faint trace of laundry dried near a fire, a whisper of salt, and faintest of all, the sharp, cold edge of gasoline, something that only appeared when humans had passed through. Ash lowered his body, slipping silently through the brush. He knew this smell. Years ago, during a harsher winter than this, his pack had been driven from the mountain rim by trappers laying steel jaws for wolves. Rotten meat, the snap of metal, the choked silence after a nightfall of howling. The memory carved deep, like a scar that wouldn't heal, had kept him away from all things human ever since. But today, the smoke didn't carry danger. It was mixed with something else, the metallic edge of thin blood, and the musky scent of wet dog hair. Ash crept closer, each pawfall silent on the thick bed of needles. Up ahead, a small clearing opened flat ground surrounded by wind-tossed pines. At its center stood a crooked cabin, its roof patched with old tin, smoke curling from a rusted stovepipe. Not far from the cabin, tied loosely to a stake near a fallen log, lay an old dog. Its back leg was curled unnaturally, its chest rising in shallow gasps. Ash narrowed his eyes. The dog's coat was burnt gold, ears drooping, muzzle silvered with age. One leg was scraped and bleeding. The rope around its body was slack, as if it had struggled and fallen. Beside it sat an empty plastic bowl. Ash didn't approach. He remained behind a curtain of ferns, watching. The dog, Rusty, slowly lifted its head, nose twitching, eyes dull but open. There was no bark, no growl, only a feeble tail skinny and caked with dirt that wagged once, then fell still. Ash felt a tightening in his chest. Not fear, not pity, but recognition. As if he had seen that look before in the mud pit, deep in the forest, when a tiny creature had looked up at him as though his presence alone was the last thread holding the world together. A soft creak of metal. Ash turned his head. The cabin door opened quietly, and a man stepped onto the porch. An older man, late 40s, broad-shouldered, his hair more gray than black. His skin was weathered from sun and silence. In one hand he held a tin cup, steam still rising from it. His eyes turned toward Rusty, brows furrowing gently. "Rusty," he murmured, his voice deep and rough. "Trying to stand again? Told you to rest, old boy." Rusty flicked an ear but couldn't rise. The man set down the cup and walked over. He knelt beside the dog, checked the rope, then took out a small knife and cut the line that had rubbed raw against Rusty's leg. His hands were calloused, but gentle. He rewrapped the dog's leg with a strip of clean bandage and stroked its back with care. Ash watched from the shadows, unmoving. The man's name was Logan Barrett, a retired forest ranger who had chosen to live alone on the forest's edge after his wife passed away from lung disease 3 winters ago. The ranger station up on the northern hill had long been shut down. Only Logan remained with his tiny pine cabin, his old dog, and the trees. Ash didn't know any of that. But his eyes, trained by years of avoiding mankind, recognized one thing. The man didn't carry a gun. He had no traps, no scent of dried blood, only the faint bitterness of stale coffee and stillness. Ash turned away, slipped back into the trees without leaving a sound. He traveled about half a mile, then stopped beneath a mossy fir. There he lay down, not curled, not alert. He stretched out, resting his head on a gnarled root. His eyes gazed upward, into the canopy, speckled with filtered light. One image played again in his mind: Clover's eyes in the mud, Rusty's wagging tail, and the man's gaze not like a hunter's, not like a master's, but like someone who had known loss, like him. Ash didn't sleep. The mountain wind drifted over the ridges, carrying scents of melting snow, fading embers, and a breath without form. In that moment, deep within the boundless woods, the old wolf, for the first time in many years, did not feel like the last living thing. A single owl hooted from far away. Ash closed his eyes, not out of fatigue, but because, for once, he didn't need to guard. The morning mist still clung to the treetops. Sparrows had yet to sing their first song of the day. Ash was already awake, his front legs stiff from the chill that had seeped into his joints overnight. He gave a hard shake, sending a fine spray of dew from his ears, then began moving again, following the muddy trail along the creek, where yesterday's footprints were still damp. The body of an old wolf no longer carried the supple grace it once had. But something today urged him forward quicker than usual. Perhaps it was the wind. The wind carried a strange scent, sharp, fresh, metallic, and blood. Not deer blood, not rabbit. This blood was heavier, older, human. Ash paused at the edge of a rocky ravine, where the terrain dropped suddenly and jagged stones jutted from the earth like ancient bones. At the bottom lay a sparse patch of woods, roots sprawled across the ground, and a man's body, crumpled among the fallen leaves. Ash didn't descend immediately. From above, he scanned the scene. A long, dark smear stretched from a nearby tree to the body as if the man had tried to drag himself. Beside him lay a large, broken branch, its splintered end stained red. His left leg was twisted unnaturally, the knee swollen, his pants torn, blood trailing from thigh to boot. He lay motionless, save for the faint rise and fall of his chest. Rusty, the old dog, was kneeling beside him, licking his face with a dry tongue. He whimpered low, circling in anxious bursts, as if pleading with the forest for help. Ash felt something seize inside his chest. He had seen this before. Not once, but many times back when he had a pack, before the snow. But this was different. There was something in Rusty's cries that Ash understood. If no one came, the man would die. And again, just like with Clover, Ash stood at a choice. He could turn away, fade into the woods, leave it all behind like a gust of wind into bramble. No one expected anything of him. But the man's eyes, parted just slightly, cloudy with pain, had already seen Ash. No fear, no accusation, just a gaze. Quiet. Ash stepped forward. Slowly, Rusty lifted his head and whined faintly, but didn't stop him. Ash reached the man's side and lowered his nose to the man's chest, where the breath, thin as silk, still clung. Logan exhaled. A single word rasped from his cracked throat. Help. Ash didn't know the word, but he understood the meaning. The old wolf turned toward the northeast where, just last night, he had caught the scent of an old ranger outpost. A trace of gasoline, the low hum of a small generator, and the presence of humans not dangerous. Ash ran. His left foreleg still ached from a slip down the slope yesterday, but he darted like a gray arrow through deadfall and slick moss-covered stones. Roots snapped beneath his weight. His undercoat soaked with morning mist. But he didn't stop. And then, through the trees, past a wisp of rising smoke, he saw it. The Granite Creek Ranger Station, long abandoned during winter, now reoccupied by a temporary staffer. Ivy Holt. She stood on the porch, jacket unzipped, holding a notebook and a cup of coffee. Her brown hair was tied back, her eyes shadowed with fatigue from overnight shifts. She'd only been stationed here 4 days, filling in for a colleague on leave. Ash stopped 20 yards from the porch. He let out a sharp staccato sound, not a howl, not a bark, just a clipped, urgent rasp. Ivy turned. For the first time she saw a wild wolf out in the open. Not hiding, not growling, staring straight into her eyes. Her hand twitched toward the radio clipped to her belt. Reflex. But before she could speak, another sound reached her. A long, broken whine, closer now. And then Rusty appeared, staggering from the edge of the woods, his fur matted with dried blood. "Rusty?" Ivy gasped. "Oh, my God!" She dropped her cup and ran. Rusty whimpered and turned to Ash, then turned back to Ivy as if trying to explain. Ash turned and moved again, not fast, but with enough urgency that Ivy understood. "Wait," she murmured, then looked at Rusty. "He's showing me where to go, isn't he?" Rusty gave a faint bark and limped after. Ivy darted inside, grabbed the emergency kit, her radio, and the keys to the old pickup at the bottom of the slope. Less than 2 minutes later, the truck roared to life and sped down the red dirt trail, dust billowing behind. Ash ran ahead, a gray shadow against the trees. 20 minutes later, they reached the ravine. Ivy slammed the brakes. Logan was still there, still unconscious, blood still leaking around the crude bandage he'd tied with a ripped coat. Rusty rushed to him, barking wildly. "Logan!" Ivy screamed, dropping beside him. I'm here, stay with me." She applied pressure, injected morphine from the med kit, and radioed for emergency air evac. Her hands trembled from adrenaline, but her voice was steady. Ash didn't come close. He stood in the trees, beside a young fir. Ivy looked up, and met his eyes. No words, just a long, locked gaze between woman and wolf, as if both knew that without the other, Logan Barrett would not be alive. A distant roar of helicopter blades cut through the air, growing louder. Dust spiraled, trees bowed. Ash turned and disappeared into the forest. But he knew this time he wasn't an outsider anymore. The helicopter thundered overhead, sending fierce gusts through the canopy and lifting swirls of dust from the forest floor. Ivy shielded her eyes with one hand, the other pressed firmly against Logan's wound until the rapid response team from Joseph County landed. 2 medics leapt from the chopper, bringing a stretcher, shock meds, and portable IV equipment. Rusty stood just a few paces away, whimpering faintly. The old dog was nearly spent, but his eyes never left his master. Ash was no longer there. Ivy knew it the moment she glanced toward the young fir tree where his gaze had met hers. Nothing remained, no silver shadow, no soft breath, only absence, thick and heavy in the air, like a cord cut mid-song. Logan was strapped to the stretcher, chest bandaged, body stabilized. He wasn't conscious, but he responded to touch, and his vitals, though weak, held steady. "Looks like someone stopped the bleeding just in time," one medic muttered, examining the makeshift bandage knotted with torn coat, fabric clumsy, but effective. Ivy said nothing. Her eyes drifted back toward the trees, where the wind moved through the pines like a question that had never needed asking. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Logan and Rusty away. Ivy stood alone on the ravine floor, still as a marker stone, not in shock, not from fear, but because she felt deep in her chest that she stood at a threshold, one no wilderness medicine course had ever prepared her for. A line between survival instinct and something greater, something like grace. That gray shadow, a lone wolf who had guided her here, hadn't done it for food, not for reward. Not out of any animal need, but for something unnamed. 3 days later, Ivy returned to the ranger station. She had spent nearly all of that afternoon cleaning up the site, filing the emergency report, and relaying her account to the district office. People called her a hero, but Ivy didn't feel like one. She knew exactly who had saved Logan. That night, she opened her field notebook and wrote her first entry since arriving. Not all signals have to be spoken. Some stories begin with a glance and end with a choice, and sometimes we're just lucky enough to witness them. She closed the book and set it on the windowsill. Beside it, she placed a strip of dried meat, not fresh, not enticing, but just fragrant enough to be noticed. She knew Ash wouldn't eat it, and he didn't. That night, Ivy sat by the fireplace, nursing a cup of tea. Outside, snow hadn't returned yet, but the Wallowa air had taken on that damp, bone-deep chill that signaled winter's slow return. She looked toward the window from time to time, not expectantly, but not indifferently either. It wasn't until close to midnight, when the fire had died low and her tea had gone lukewarm, that she stood to lock the door. And that's when she saw it. 10 steps from the ranger station, under the bough of a heavy pine, a pair of eyes caught the moonlight. Not moving, not hiding, not growling, just watching. Ash. She didn't open the door, didn't step out. Ivy only placed a hand gently against the glass, her own quiet way of acknowledging presence. Ash didn't approach, but he stood there for several minutes, letting the wind rustle his fur, now stiff and cracked with dried mud. Then he turned and melted into the forest. In the days that followed, Ivy left signs of her own: an angled plank of wood, a stone stacked like an arrow pointing north. No food, no scent too human. And then, on the 6th morning, when she stepped outside the station, she saw it. A wolf's paw print. Not a random pass-through, but a single Mark I that had waited. Next to it, a different print smaller. Not canine, not deer, a hoof. She knelt. The outer edge of the print dipped slightly into the soil young horse, still growing. Clover? She stood abruptly, scanning the trees. But the woods were still. Nothing moved. She returned inside and jotted in her notebook. They came back, not to ask for anything, just to say, "We're still here." Granite Creek Ranger Station became her home base for every seasonal migration survey. She didn't request transfer to the city, didn't accept the better post in Medford. For Ivy, nothing mattered more than those footprints each morning, those wolf hairs caught on tree bark, and the unmarked days lived quietly among the trees. People started calling her the Wolf Woman. She never denied it, never confirmed it either. She only smiled when children asked, "Can wolves really talk, ma'am?" And she'd say, "They don't need to. You just have to know how to listen with your heart." Autumn arrived early across the Wallowa Plateau. The pine shadows stretched longer, the sunlight softened, and the wind whistled across the treetops with the breath of oncoming winter. Aspen leaves fell like golden rain, covering trails remembered only by those who belonged to the woods. Ivy Holt zipped her jacket, slung a small pack over her shoulder, and tucked her field notebook into the chest pocket. Today's assignment was to inspect the outer trail near Black Pine Ridge, a remote stretch few ventured into, even among rangers. No service, no roads, just wilderness. But for Ivy, it wasn't unfamiliar ground. It was here, just over 2 months ago, that a lone wolf had led her through the fog to save a man's life. And here, where she had learned to see the world with different eyes. The sky was overcast. Vapor rose from the cold earth, casting a ghostly veil over everything. Ivy walked slowly, listening to the sound of her boots brushing dry leaves, the breeze threading through limbs, and the subtle noises behind her not threatening. Just the feeling that she wasn't walking alone. After nearly an hour, she reached a clearing, an open patch split by a narrow stream flowing between two mossy ridges. On the far side, fallen trees lay jumbled like the aftermath of last year's snowstorm. Ivy stopped, her heart clenched. There, in the dirt clear, as day were tracks, wolf prints, hoof prints, and one soft impression as if something small had once lain down. Then stood again. She stepped closer to the stream. The water was clear, whispering. And then she saw them. Across the creek, bathed in a shaft of rare sunlight breaking through the clouds, stood 3 creatures. A mare tall, slate gray, with a presence as calm and solid as mountain rock. A young horse, not a foal anymore. His coat had deepened from reddish fluff to burnished amber, his mane catching the breeze, legs sturdy, eyes alight with mischief. And beside them, Ash, the old wolf, no growls, no pounding hooves, just a silence so complete it seemed sacred. Clover, the once dying, full lifted a front leg, whinnied softly, then began to circle Ash in playful loops. He nudged the wolf's ribs, backed away, reared up, spun a dance of teasing joy, like a younger brother seeking attention. Ash didn't snarl. He dipped his head, half tolerating, half amused. Ivy stood frozen. A part of her reached for her camera, but something deeper stopped her. She didn't want to fracture the delicate truth unfolding before her. She only sat down, opened her notebook, and with trembling hands wrote, "If someone ever asks me what a miracle looks like, I won't talk about rainbows or tunnels of light. I'll tell them about an old wolf, a foal that almost didn't make it, and a herd of mustangs that chose forgiveness." Ash looked up, catching Ivy's gaze across the water. They were only separated by a few feet of stream, close enough to see each other, far enough for respect to remain. Sable, the mare, didn't react. She glanced at Ivy, then lowered her head to graze, as if to say Ivy's presence no longer threatened the balance. Clover trotted back to Ash, nuzzled his neck. Then, suddenly, he pranced toward Ivy's, stopping just at the stream's edge. Ash followed, standing behind the young horse. The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of damp earth and fading wildflowers. Ivy knelt, pulled a small item from her pocket, a strip of soft leather tied around a flat stone, a marker she often used to tag observation spots. She gently tossed it across the water, landing it in the grass between them. Clover looked. Ash looked. Neither approached, but it lay there like a signpost, a whisper, proof that something had happened here no one could explain, and no one needed to. A few minutes later, the herd began to move. Sable in front, Clover in the center, Ash bringing up the rear. They didn't hurry, didn't flee, just moved like a current, steady, deep, and unstoppable. Clover glanced back a second time. This time, Ivy smiled. She didn't wave. She simply placed her hand over her heart. And in a fleeting beat of time, Ash nodded. He nodded, then vanished into the forest. Ivy remained long after. She added one more line to her notebook. No one teaches us how to say thank you with silence, but the forest knows. And today, I learned. Late winter in eastern Oregon no longer bit like it did in January, but the cold still cracked bare hands without gloves. The valley winds carried the scent of melting snow, decaying wood, and somewhere in between, a trace of wood smoke from a hidden cabin deep in the forest. Ivy Holt sat on the cabin porch, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, her gaze fixed on the trail that disappeared into the pines. Beside her was Logan Barrett, the man who'd come within inches of death at the bottom of a ravine, saved by something he never fully explained. Rusty lay at Logan's feet, muzzle resting on his knee, old eyes staring into the forest, waiting, expecting something familiar to return. "The air's calmer this morning," Ivy said softly, her voice as gentle as the wind. "I think the thaw's coming early." Logan sipped his coffee and nodded. "Yeah, birds are back. Rusty's sleeping better. What about you?" Ivy smiled faintly. "I still hike into the woods every week. Not far, just leaving little signs. No food, no traps, just so they know someone remembers." Logan didn't ask who they were. He knew. They'd both seen something the mind couldn't explain, a wolf, a foal, and a herd of mustangs. That chose something not rooted in instinct, trust. That day, the snow melted faster than usual. The earth revealed slick black mud beneath layers of decaying leaves. Ivy stepped over a fallen log that crossed the path like she'd done 100 times, her steps light, eyes scanning the trail. Then she stopped. A hoof print. Deep, steady, running along the ridge. Beside it, a paw print. Wolf, evenly spaced, traveling side by side through the mud. Ivy froze for a moment, then followed. As she emerged between two ancient firs, she saw them. Ash, his silver coat now tinged with the wear of age, running beside Clover, no longer a foal, but a lean, powerful Mustang. They raced through the snow like children in play, chasing, turning, spinning. No longer predator and prey, just companions. Sable stood in the distance, watching. Behind her, the herd stretched quietly through the trees, neither pressing forward nor withdrawing, as if guarding, but not afraid. Clover bumped Ash's shoulder with his muzzle, then darted away, tail flicking, hooves high and playful. Ash paused, then lunged forward, snow flying beneath his paws, his movement full of strength but softened by joy. Ivy knelt, opened her notebook, wrote, "They chose what no one believed real. They chose to love." She didn't move forward, didn't call out, didn't take a photo. She simply watched, smiling as tears welled, not from sorrow, but from knowing that something sacred was unfolding, beyond all definitions. Ash slowed, turned toward the woods. He knew he was being watched, but he didn't flinch, didn't hide. He simply looked, then turned, and ran on. A week later, Ivy returned to her post at the main ranger station. She no longer worked full-time at Echo Hollow, but she kept her ritual recording observations from the forest no one else believed in. Logan recovered faster than doctors expected. He still needed a cane to walk, but his spirit had sharpened. His voice grew steadier. Rusty no longer lay silent all day. He barked each morning, then waited patiently as Logan brewed coffee like a sacred rhythm of the woods. One late afternoon, as March warmed the Wallowa Peaks, Ivy sat on the porch, recounting the story for the first time to a group of visiting elementary students. She told it quietly, without flair, but every child fell silent as the tale unfolded. At the end, a small boy raised his hand. "Do you think the wolf will come back?" Ivy smiled. "Not everyone is a person, but anyone can be good. And sometimes we don't need to be called to know our way home." A week later, just after sunrise, Ivy was checking the snow barrier nets on the southern trail when she saw it, far off in the distance, the herd of Mustangs galloping across a clearing. Clover led the way, strong, beautiful, like a streak of living silver. Beside him, stride for stride, ran Ash, not behind, not ahead, not chasing, just running, together. As they passed, Clover paused for the briefest of seconds, turned to look at her. His eyes were bright, unafraid. Then he ran on. Ivy stood still, her fingers gripping the spine of her notebook. Wind brushed her hair. Spring whispered softly through the treetops. She wrote, "They don't need to belong anywhere, because in the end, love is home, and even instinct can learn to forgive." If you believe that kindness can come from any creature, whether a wolf or a wild horse, leave a comment below with the number 1. And if this story moved you in any way, just type 0. We'll know exactly what that silence meant. Don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories, because each week we'll take you on a journey where the wild meets the human, and healing happens in the unlikeliest places. One story, one soul, one chance to believe again. See you in the next video.